Indecent exposure is still indecent exposure. Doesn't matter your sexuality.
Have you ever heard from either President Biden or the First Lady?
No.
There's really no point in me working that much harder because I'm only going to keep 40 cents on the dollar.
No.
My first ever radical revolutionary crush was Fidel Castro.
Public kink displays at Pride events are sparking debate again. Joe Biden is apparently a terrible grandfather, a left-wing streamer doesn't think economics is real, and a TikToker praises a brutal dictator. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my daily series where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics and from across the internet from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and sticking around, and if you're a returning viewer, you already know what I'm going to say. Don't forget to hit that like button and do leave a comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Now, as I'm sure you're aware by now, June is LGBT Pride Month. And as happens every year, a familiar debate is bubbling up to the surface. Are kink and fetish displays really an appropriate part of Pride celebrations? And why are they being done in front of children? The latest Pride event to spark this debate was in Washington, D.C., where footage from Timcast News shows a kink and fetish display parading through the march and passing by young children. Take a look. Many people from within the LGBT community, like my friend the TikToker AJ Sanchez, have spoken out against this kind of thing.
Indecent exposure is still indecent exposure. Doesn't matter your sexuality. Doesn't matter how you identify. Pride is not an exception to that, all right? Have fun, celebrate, shake some ass, but keep it cute, keep it classy, and most importantly, keep it in your pants until the circuit party or after parties afterwards. Let's try to represent our community in a positive light this Pride Month. I'll leave you guys with that, something to think about. I've already seen some videos rolling out.
But of course, on TikTok especially, every year you have people who defend this interesting practice. It's the kind of thing I wish I could just ignore, but I really do feel compelled to speak about. First and foremost, because I'm sick of seeing people conflate our love and our family and the immutable way that we are with kinks and fetishes. I'm not shaming anybody, honestly. I don't care. Like, knock yourself out. Do whatever will make you happy with whoever will have you. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with being gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. Heterosexual people have kinks and fetishes. Heterosexual people like pup play too, I guess. None of it has anything to do with us. So just the very premise is frustrating to me because you're playing into critics' hands by conflating our love and our family and who we are with what is actually, sexually outrageous or controversial stuff. And if they were doing the kink at Pride stuff, but it was an 18+ audience exclusively, I'd probably just roll my eyes and ignore it or maybe just tweet once about why I didn't like it. But I'm sorry. Doing that in front of children is up. What's wrong with y'all? Can you not see there's kids in the audience? Do you not know that these events are not just 18 and up? There's no age restrictions? Yet you're donning the assless chaps? Yet you're walking around with your fetish gear? I guess I also would say parents should know better at this point than to take their kids to these events, especially because they probably do have access to see like what displays are going to be there, and they probably could see kink and fetish stuff is part of it. So parents should also be having better discretion than this. But y'all, you need to pick one. Kink at Pride or kids at Pride. You can't do both. That's not just creepy, but it is a recipe for absolutely bringing down our community's name and playing into every false allegation and stereotype about us imaginable. For years, And years, homophobic people claimed statistically inaccurately that gay or lesbian people were more likely to harm children, to be a threat to minors. And here some of y'all are actually out there in public on camera being a threat to minors in the name of LGBT pride. It is so disgusting, just on its merits alone, but also as a counterproductive measure, sabotaging acceptance. I mean, we have LGBT acceptance going down in this country now, and a whole panic where people are calling, sometimes rightly, but sometimes wrongly, calling LGBT people groomers. And you guys think this is the way to dispel those allegations? Look, 99% of everyday gay and lesbian people would look at that and think it's totally inappropriate, what I showed you guys, and not support it. But when you feed clips like this to haters that then make them go viral, it spreads this misperception that a lot of people who still don't accept us have, that we are a threat, that we are harmful. It's really got to stop. It's doing so much more harm than any form of good whatsoever, which I can't even see what good that would be. Nobody's trying to stop you from doing pup play behind closed doors. There's no movement to prohibit you from doing that. There's nothing you need to be promoting acceptance for. Just mind your business and knock yourself out. This is just one of so many reasons why I feel totally alienated from the official pride movement. But let me know what you think in the comments below, guys, because this kind of stuff really does leave me lost for words a little bit. Up next, President Biden promised that he would restore decency and common sense and character and integrity to the White House. But he's also apparently a terrible grandfather. Basically, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, has a 5-year-old daughter, Navy Joan, who of course was born out of wedlock. And for years, President Biden refused to even acknowledge her. Only after intense public shaming, including from me, did the president and the first lady finally acknowledged that Navy Joan was their granddaughter. But even after that saga, apparently they've still never bothered to meet their own granddaughter. Here's a clip from an interview that Piers Morgan did with London Roberts, who is the mother of Biden's granddaughter.
Have you ever heard from either President Biden or the First Lady directly?
No.
Not a
No, I
phone
have
call
not.
or a letter or anything?
No.
Do you find that surprising?
No. No, I don't really. I feel like that's something that, they've waited for Hunter to step up before they step into.
Would you like the president, if he's watching this interview, what would you say to President Biden about potentially meeting Navy at some stage?
That door is always open. Always has been and always will be.
I'm sorry, but what is wrong with Joe Biden? What kind of messed up person talks constantly about how much they love their grandchildren and is constantly photographed at events and spending time with them and brings them up, but then just has one they totally discard and have never even bothered to meet? Now, the explanation that you will hear is, well, Hunter Biden barely has a relationship with his daughter, so they don't want to step on his toes or circumvent that, estrangement that hopefully from this interview is apparently taking steps closer to them having a real relationship, though Hunter Biden still never met his daughter, which I get. But I'm sorry, I would never accept that as a grandfather. If my child was a deadbeat dad, of course I'm going around them to meet my grandchild, to provide for my grandchild, to love and develop a relationship with my grandchild. And I'm also constantly shaming and getting on my child's case that they need to step up to the plate and be a father to the child that they fathered. And yes, I know President Biden is a busy man. He's the freaking president, right? I acknowledge that. But he's had plenty of time to be photographed and spent with all his other grandchildren. And they could come to him. I'm sure they'd be willing to fly to DC and come meet him, and he could certainly afford to pay for it. Now, I already know that Biden simps in the comments are typing out furious replies about how bad a person Trump is. Okay? I acknowledge that. Basically everybody, even his supporters, knows Trump is an immoral human being. The difference is Biden is supposed to be the decent one, the man of integrity, restoring dignity to the White House. But he's not. He's literally just not. That's why this bothers me so much. If we want to just go ahead and admit that our politicians can be terrible people and we no longer care, we only care what they're going to do in the office and what their policies are, Okay, but don't tell us that you're all about decency and then you can't even be bothered to acknowledge your granddaughter for years, and then even when you do acknowledge her, you can't be bothered to meet her. Sorry, y'all, but I think that's evil. I think it's demonic. I can't relate to it at all, and I just can't imagine the values that would push one to make these decisions. But what do you guys think, especially grandparents? Am I missing something? You know, obviously I don't have kids. I don't have grandparents. Maybe there's a piece of this picture that I'm just missing. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Up next, the socialist streamer and internet celebrity Hasan Piker apparently doesn't believe economics is real. So in a recent clip he posted to TikTok, he argues that high taxes don't actually disincentivize people from working. Yes, seriously.
Let's just say someone's taxed at 60%. Do you feel like people would say, there's really no point in me working that much harder because I'm only going to keep 40 cents on the dollar?
No. I mean, you get taxed at that rate. Do you think?
No, I don't.
No, we
no,
moved to
37%.
Yeah.
Okay, but regardless, you still get the federal 37%.
Correct.
Are you disincentivized to work harder?
No.
Well, there you go.
But I think there's a
you know
real
what?
difference when you go above 50%. I think people really have a negative reaction when it's over 50.
I would say 50 to 60%. I probably would be disincentivized. At 60% is just
if the goods that you're being provided from the government are just so good from
That's a great point. You nailed it. That is the biggest problem in this country.
Good for you,
I think the
Jack.
biggest problem in this country isn't necessarily the taxes, because I have this conversation with my European friends all the time. I have some lovely friends who were visiting from France recently, and they were shocked when I just started describing to them the American tax structure. They were like, what? We thought you guys don't pay any taxes at all. You have no amenities for it. You have nothing to show for it, because unfortunately our spending is awful in this country.
But of course, he wants a ton more government spending and vast new government programs, all run and administered by the same federal bureaucrats who've done an awful job with the ones we have now, even by his own admission. Now, having a degree in economics, or even just having read that basic economics book you can see behind me, watching this was maddening. I've had policy debates with people over the years where they argue that high tax rates are worth it. They acknowledge that obviously, they have negative economic consequences. They reduce incentives to work and other things, but they say, the trade-off is worth it because we can use that money to build schools or hospitals or whatever, and we can have that debate. But this man just told us with a straight face that a 60% marginal income tax rate, you only get to keep 40 cents out of every dollar you earn above a certain point, isn't going to discourage anybody from working. I feel gaslit. You would be hard-pressed to find a single economist who would agree with that statement. Even ones who support higher marginal tax rates wouldn't. It's one of the most basic lessons of all of economics, that everything comes down to incentives. And when the incentive for additional work is decreased significantly, people, when they're weighing the costs and benefits, some work isn't going to be worth it anymore. Now, maybe he doesn't get it because his idea of work is streaming. Not to say there's not work, but it's not exactly, taxing labor. Neither really is YouTubing and podcasting, right? So I am not shading him. I'm in a similar boat, although making way less money and with a much smaller audience. But if he was actually an entrepreneur or a high-level professional who was in this top bracket and was actually hit with 60% marginal tax rates, every dollar he earns, he only gets to keep 40 frickin' cents. Of course you're going to be at a certain point less motivated to do additional work, to launch a new project, to expand your business, to put in extra hours, to grab an additional client, an extra contract. Of course you are. I mean, we have one of the most influential internet personalities, a guy that millions and millions of young people look to as a thought leader, completely ignorant or in outright denial of the most basic aspects of economic reality. It's insane. And you don't have to take my word for it, guys. Let's go to the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation. The many marginal tax rates on labor income make tax codes more complex and disincentivize additional work at the margin, which translates into lower productivity and less economic growth. Empirical studies have shown that, in general, a reduction in marginal tax rates translates to more working hours. And this isn't just true in America, it's true anywhere human beings are influenced by incentives. So in the United Kingdom, for example, research has shown that taxes and benefits affect both the decision to enter the job market as well as the number of hours worked. Wait, you mean to tell me that studies have found empirically that the exact thing you'd expect to happen based on basic human incentives is what happens? Now that can't be. Guys, that can't be. My favorite streamer told me that's not true. Look, people like Hasan Piker, they're free to argue for higher taxes if they want. They should probably acknowledge that the US already has a very progressive, aka we tax the rich a lot, federal tax system, but sure, let's have a debate. What really bothers me, though, is the astounding levels of ignorance or gaslighting that we see when they comment on these issues. And folks like Hasan very rarely step outside of their ideological echo chambers, so this kind of thing rarely gets called out or exposed, and they're almost never pressed on it. No shade to the guys at the Iced Coffee Hour. They seem pretty cool, honestly. I'd love to go on their show, but they're not exactly going to grill him on the finer points of economic theory. Like, that's just... they're not the guys for that. It's not the venue for that. But he notoriously avoids venues where his radical ideas might actually be challenged by people who are familiar with these things, all while influencing an entire generation with his radical beliefs. It really, really concerns me, guys. That's just my take. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And now, it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the clock out.
Pronoun of the day is slug.
Make sure you're subscribed so you can stick around and join us again sometime, and don't forget to hit that like button if you get a kick out of this video. Now, let's tune in to a TikToker explaining why she loves the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro? Yep, that's what she said.
So I'm on a dating app, and I come across this guy, pretty cute, named Fidel. And immediately I'm like, okay.
I already don't like where this is going, but... okay, I guess.
And then I scroll down, and this man had on his profile, moderate.
Okay, cool. He might have some common sense about him. Sounds like somebody you should be interested in getting to know and maybe finding out what does that mean to him.
Imagine your parents gift you with a name of an OG radical leftist, like really a king of a guy.
Oh? A king of a guy. Fidel Castro. Girl, put down the crack pipe. You've had enough.
And you wind up identifying as moderate. My first ever radical revolutionary crush was Fidel Castro.
Yeah, oh my gosh. This is exactly what I was afraid of from the start of this video.
I learned about him in a dictators and revolutionaries class in a Latin American and Latinx studies department.
Okay, so Latinx studies department is a good sign that she was probably learning woke fake history at some left-wing college, not actual history or facts. So maybe, to give our friend here the benefit of the doubt, maybe she's just totally misinformed, and that's why she likes him. I don't know, maybe.
At a liberal arts college in the Northeast, and by the end of this class, I was crushing on Fidel with the beard and the cigar.
So, either you didn't learn anything real about him, or you're psychotic. Those are the only two explanations.
And not everyone's gonna have my type. You know, not everyone's going to be down for a Castro, or a Guevara, or an Edward Said, or an Edward Snowden.
Hold up. Don't lump in Edward Snowden with those people. That is very disrespectful to him.
Not everyone is going to want an Ansel Dua, or a Hooks, or a Davis. But if your name is Fidel, and I find out that you're a political moderate, you're Fidel now. Just Fidel.
All right, so in a nutshell, it seems like this guy dodged a bullet. I mean, Fidel Castro, the former leader of Cuba for many decades, was a brutal dictator. He was a tyrant. He arrested and executed dissenters and his political opponents. He arrested journalists and suppressed the freedom of the press, only allowing state-run propaganda media. You don't have to take my word for that. Take Fidel Castro's.
Let me be specific. Your newspapers, radio, television, motion pictures are under state control. No dissent or opposition is allowed in the public media.
Bárbara.
Yes.
Nosotros no tenemos las mismas concepciones.
We do not have your same conceptions.
Nosotros no tenemos el concepto de libertad de
Our
prensa.
concept of freedom of the press is not yours.
Desde luego, se lo digo con toda.
And I say this very
No
honestly.
tengo que ocultar absolutamente.
I have nothing to hide.
Si nos pregunta que aquí puede aparecer un periódico.
If you ask us if a paper could appear here against socialism, I could say honestly, no, it cannot
No lo
appear.
permitirá ni el partido,
It would not be allowed by
ni
the
el
party,
gobierno,
the government,
ni el
nor
pueblo.
the people.
En ese sentido,
Okay.
no poseemos
In that sense,
la libertad
we do not
de prensa,
have
posee
the
usted.
freedom of the press that you possess in the U.S.
Now, I understand that some people like to point to Cuba's healthcare or its literacy rates as some sort of win, showing that he was really a progressive leader for the people. But a lot of that was based on an incomplete or overly rosy picture of those systems and outcomes, painted by the lack of actual press freedom and by the only presence of media being state-run propaganda. And it's an interesting socialist utopia that's so wonderful, people flee there in homemade rafts, risking drowning in the ocean to try to escape and get somewhere else. But we have popular TikTokers simping for this guy, calling him a king of a guy and thirsting for him. People like this are either incredibly, disgracefully ignorant, or they hold, frankly, evil beliefs. I mean, it's really not hard to not simp for dictators. Let me give you guys an example, right, to show you this applied to my own perspective and my own philosophy. Chile had a leader who was also a dictator named Augusto Pinochet. He enacted many policies that I like as a free market capitalist. Free trade, privatization of industries, tax cuts. And Chile's economy thrived under those policies. But you will never catch me praising him without massive caveats and nuance, at least, or simping for him, or calling for an American Pinochet, or referring to him as an OG king of a guy, or anything like that, because he was also a tyrant who tortured and detained critics and ruled via military dictatorship. Again, it's not hard to not simp for evil people. But apparently on TikTok, it's a Herculean task for these people to avoid sympathizing with just some of the most evil and brutal and authoritarian leaders that we've seen in recent political history. These kids, just for a wink and a nod about socialism, they'll tolerate and worship people who are brutal authoritarians. And none of this is like sourced through right-wing information, guys. These things I'm telling you about Fidel Castro, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, The Guardian. These left-leaning sources have all extensively documented the repression and human rights abuses of the Castro regime. But guys, he was a socialist revolutionary. Oh, and a mustache so hot. Get a hold of yourself, girly. This shit's out of control. Oh, I just can't with these people. I don't know. Speak to a Cuban American. Seriously. And ask them about Castro and whether he was a king of a guy. See what they'll have to tell you. All right, everybody, I'm going to have to leave it there for now because I can't engage with this TikTok delulu anymore without incurring permanent brain damage. Make sure to hit that like button to reward my suffering and comment with your thoughts on that video. Now, before we wrap up today's show, I'll read a few of your comments you left on the last episode. One person says, your eyebrows have a life of their own. Yeah, they really do. I have very expressive eyebrows, and they used to get me in trouble because a teacher would say something to me and I would just naturally go like... But for what I do now, it kind of works well. So another person says, Brad, I'm still loving and liking your content despite the fact that you are wearing a Chelsea football shirt. Yes, I have been a Chelsea fan since 2012 through good times and now, frankly, pretty terrible times, and I will remain one. Another person says Brad's love language is deregulation. Ugh, don't get me going. No, like, joking aside, I'm not an anarchist. I don't believe in no rules or no regulations. I just think that because we're so vastly over-regulated and restricted that, yes, deregulation in many instances is a very good idea. Another person says the look on Brad's face when these people go off on their tangents kill me. I know. And guys, I'm not gaslighting you. Like, I have seen these videos before when I film the reaction. I usually watch them once or twice and then, put them in my document for the show to prepare. And I prepare some things about what I want to talk about. It's not a blind react. But I'm also still not faking my facial expressions. Like, even on the third time of hearing it, some of this delulu still shocks me. Another person says, I need a t-shirt saying the dictionary isn't a choose your own adventure game. Yeah, I don't know if anybody ever said that before or if that's an official Brad Polumbo line, but maybe if I do some merch, I'll make some merch with that quote on it. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. All right, everybody, that's it for today's show. We'll leave it there for now. Don't forget to hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed and stick around. And if you're listening to us on audio podcasts, be sure to rate and review wherever you're listening. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.